Israel and Iran have entered into a ceasefire that both parties violated early on. The continued attacks angered US President Donald Trump, who did not hesitate to publicly castigate both nations for their conduct. Political scientist and commentator based at the University of Pretoria, Roland Henwood, joins us now for more. Mr. Henwood, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the late edition.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Now, Ronald, I see that Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian addressed the nation today and claimed the country achieved a historic victory, so to speak, following the conflict that was imposed by Israel. So, in your view, what strategic objectives might Israel have aimed to achieve by striking a radar installation so deep inside Iranian territory, especially so soon after a ceasefire was declared? Was this perhaps a calculated deterrent, a retaliatory necessity, I might add, or even a signal to Tehran and international observers?
I think what happened was that this was a response following on a missile fired from Iran just before my understanding is just before the ceasefire took effect, and Israel retaliated against that. But if one looks at what President Trump said, the retaliation was quite a substantial one, and that is why he reacted angrily, and he basically told Israel to call it off.
Yeah, now, given that both Israel and Iran reportedly violated the ceasefire within hours, just how seriously can such agreements be taken in the current geopolitical climate? And are these violations tactical exceptions, or do they even reflect a deeper lack of political will or feasibility for sustained de-escalation?
I think one must take it seriously. I think the two parties take it seriously. What makes it difficult is that this ceasefire was agreed on in a very short space of time. Normally this takes some time, it takes negotiations. There's a very full agreement and understanding of exactly what happens at what stage, how is this implemented. There's time allowed for communication to all the required forces, and sometimes the forces are dispersed. So it's a complex technical arrangement that is normally agreed. What we saw happen last night was a very quick, probably a very personal engagement from President Trump with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then from the side of Qatar with the Iranian leadership. I'm not sure who was speaking to whom there, but that was the way in which it was basically structured, finalized, and within a very short space of time, both governments agreed, probably having had a very little choice in terms of are we going to do this or not. Both have a lot to lose if the war continues, not only in terms of their own environments, but also the pressure from external environment. And given that context, I think it is understandable that there may be some incidents, maybe even some would try and test the resolve of the others, but the way in which President Trump reacted seems to be a very clear message that you are going to abide by this or you are going to face serious consequences, and that goes for both Israel and Iran.
And speaking of President Trump, I mean, we've seen him earlier publicly rebuking both Israel and Iran for the continued hostilities, and even uttered expletives live on national TV. How unusual is this posture from a US president, particularly towards a close ally like Israel, and what message does it send to other actors in the region?
It is not normal conduct. It's not diplomatic conduct, I think, if one must be very direct. But then we've come to see Mr. Trump doing things the way he wants to do it. He's not beholden to what has been happening in the past and the protocols of the past. What is important is that he had a very direct message. And he had a very direct message to the Israeli government, clearly stating that this is not acceptable. You are going to play by the rules. You are going to abide by this. And I think if one may broaden the context, we've been hearing that there was some tension between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu for some time, disagreements on what was happening, especially in the context of Gaza. Despite that, Mr. Trump supported Israel in terms of the Iranian part of the war. But he also now drew a line and said, now we play by the rules. And I think there's a very serious content and also context, but also intent.
Right.
And clearly, Mr. Netanyahu is going to have to listen to this. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of pressure from President Trump.
indeed more pressure coming their way. I mean, even Vice President J.D. Vance saying that the bombing was a success, but then reports suggest that the stockpile was probably moved elsewhere. Is J.D. Vance laying the ground for new attacks?
I don't think so. I don't think the US, the reading at this stage is this was a once-off. We know that President Trump has been very clear on he does not want to get involved in what he calls the never-ending wars. He does not want to get involved in conflicts in the Middle East especially. He wants the US to withdraw. He wants the US to focus on other interests and focus very much in terms of his own environment, the domestic context. So this probably looks like a once-off, but it is coming with a lot of pressure on the role players to now follow the agreement and to make sure that the war comes to an end and a diplomatic process takes effect.
And from your vantage point, Roland, does this incident reflect a shift in Israel's rules of engagement vis-a-vis Iran, particularly regarding strikes within Iranian borders, as opposed to proxy battlegrounds like Syria or even Lebanon?
I think we're seeing a ground shift in terms of what is happening in the Middle East. And although there's been a lot of leeway and a lot of freedom given to the Israeli government to act, that probably is going to come to an end at some stage. It is impossible to allow the kind of conduct that we've seen from Israel to continue. So the war with Iran may be a diplomatic war, a war of words in some context, but physical conflict, my sense is that President Trump, but also others in the region and in the world have had enough of this, and they're going to probably put a lot of pressure on the process to try and contain and probably focus more on diplomacy and creating different outcomes. But the politics of the Middle East has changed substantively over the last couple of months.
All right, Ronald, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for sharing your analysis with us. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, political scientist and commentator based at the University of Pretoria, Roland Henwood. And, as Donald Trump has warned Israel against launching further attacks on Iran just hours after, he said a ceasefire between the two sides had taken effect. The United States president used an expletive as it criticized both sides after each accused the other of breaking the U.S. and Qatar brokered truce.